Greetings and salutations. Today we will be covering the case of the 1980s Franciscan priest murders. The 1980s Franciscan priest murders refer to the mysterious disappearance and or murders of two Catholic priests. Oddly enough, regardless of the name, only one of the two priests was actually Franciscan. Said murders occurred between 1982 and 1984 in the western United States. Starting from the top, we have Father Reynaldo John Rivera, a Catholic priest and a member of the Franciscan order, who served at Cathedral Basilica of St. Francis in Santa Fe, New Mexico. On the evening of August 5th, 1982, there was a call made by a man known as Michael Carmelo. In the call, he stated that his grandfather was dying near a rest stop in Waldo, and that he had requested his last rites be read. Father Patrick Gerard, the priest who originally answered the call, told the man that his eyesight was too poor for him to safely drive. It would be Rivera who would agree to meet the man and acquiesced to the request to perform the last rites. The caller stated that he would be waiting for him in Riviera in a blue pickup truck. It would just be a few scant days after that Rivera's dead body would be found, left abandoned in a muddy field near walled exit on Interstate 25. The investigation went on to show that he had not just been shot once in the stomach, but he had also been strangled with a wire. What the wire was believed to be was that of a coat hanger. However, Rivera's brown 1974 Chevy Malibu was later discovered parked with its gas tank completely empty on rest stop on the Interstate 40 near Grant. Strangely enough, his last rites kit was also not found. The Federal Bureau of Investigations made the decision to step in at that point and produced a psychological profile of the person responsible for Rivera's death. The forensic psychologist determined that the motive for Rivera's murder was driven by revenge. Law enforcement briefly considered a recent parolee as a suspect. However, he was quickly ruled out due to having a solid alibi, as well as his fingerprints not matching the unknown prints discovered on Rivera's car. There was also a former Santa Fe resident who was considered briefly as a suspect. Now on to the second victim. Reverend John Patrick Kerrigan had formerly worked in Plains, Montana, before transferring to Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Ronan. 2 days after Kerrigan's arrival, an appointment to the church would be the last time anyone would see him alive, and he was sighted near a bakery on July 20th. The next day, Father Kerrigan would fail to appear to his 6:30 Mass. On July 21st, it would take 2 more days for a missing persons report to be filed. Eventually, a bloodied coat hanger along with other bits of bloodied clothing were found lying on the shores of Flathead Lake near Polson. The items were located roughly 5 miles from Ronan. It would not be until the 30th that Father Kerrigan's car would be located. Ironically, it was also a brown Chevy Malibu, though not of the same year, and it was found to be abandoned several miles away from the site of his death. His wallet was found, and curiously enough, none of the $1,200 that were inside of it were taken from it. It was found along with a blood-stained shovel and a pillowcase in the trunk of his car. However, even though Kerrigan's remains have never been found, most believe he was actually murdered. It would be after Kerrigan's disappearance that New Mexico law enforcement would receive notifications of the case having similarities to Rivera's own case. These similarities included the fact that they were driving the same car, the fact that the scene seemed to somehow show evidence that was in a similar structure, and pointing to a similar fate to both being caused by the same implement. Both had their cars driven away from the crime scene, along with having a coat hanger involved in it, and it was believed that it was used on both of them to finish them off. As depicted by Rivera's autopsy, and while no body was found for Kerrigan's case, even his disappearance was considered linked, and the fact that there was a bloodied coat and a coat hanger found at the scene of the crime, or potential crime, caused the link to be drawn between the two men. Also, both men were around 58 years of age at the time of the incident. 2 days after Kerrigan disappeared, 31-year-old school teacher Curtis Holman went missing from Missoula. His car also was found abandoned around 40 miles from where Kerrigan's own was discovered. However, even though there was no evidence connecting the two disappearances, Holmes' brother vigorously insisted that the link was likely because of how close the brother's car was to the incident, and how close the timing also was to the incident of the father's disappearance. Law enforcement would later make further inquiries in order to find out connections between Kerrigan and Rivera, and what they did find was quite interesting. Kerrigan had been found to have spent time in the congregation of the servants of the Praclet in James Springs, New Mexico, prior to his appointment to the Roman Catholic Diocese of Helena. This congregation was used as a retreat for clergy suffering from personal difficulties. These would include substance abuse, depression, and sexual misconduct. I mean, it's a stereotype. The Diocese of Helena eventually admitted Kerrigan had spent nearly a year there, but they would refuse to disclose the reasoning as to why he had stayed there. However, one can make an educated guess as to why. Yet, no evidence has been uncovered that would directly say that Kerrigan and Rivera actually knew each other personally. It is known that on November 1984, Lieutenant Gilbert Uribari of Santa Fe stated that he had a gut feeling that the two crimes were related, and that they were likely committed by a drifter who had psychological problems with priests. However, despite the similarities, Detective Eric Lucero of New Mexico insisted in 1992 that there was no connection whatsoever between the murder of Rivera and Kerrigan and the disappearance of Kerrigan. Then, in August of 2022, Uribari came out and stated that he did not believe that the crimes were connected. Uribari was interviewed by KOB4 for the 40th anniversary of the Rivera murder. Information that furthered the case wouldn't come out until 2015, when two groups of individuals brought a class action lawsuit against the Diocese of Helena for sexual abuse. The diocese published a list of 80 clergy members who had been suspected or implicated in the abuse of minors, in the adult variety. Kerrigan was on that list, which consisted largely of priests along with some nuns. At one point, there were remains that were suspected to be Kerrigan's. However, it was proved not to be. He remains missing, and it is no longer believed at all that the case is directly connected to Father Kerrigan, regardless of the similarities. It is now believed Kerrigan's murder may have been due to one of his molestation victims getting revenge on him, or someone close to the victim, potentially a blood relative. However, the motive for Father Rivera's murder has yet to be determined. There is some speculation that Rivera's murder may be connected to another unsolved case, that of the unidentified man called William L. Toomey, who was found to have committed suicide in Boise, Idaho, in a church in 1982. However, James Ramos was convicted in that specific case. The police have followed several leads in their investigation, but none of them has turned up a viable suspect. One person who was investigated was a man who stole a car from a bar owner in the area where Father Rivera's car was found. This occurred shortly after the murder. However, the man was found to be in an Albuquerque jail, and thusly was ruled out. Another initial suspect had been a man who had been paroled 3 days before the murder, but again, he would be ruled out, even though a print shockingly similar to the suspect's was found on the victim's car. However, it was found that his fingers themselves did not match those on the victim's car, and 2 witnesses confirmed that he was with them rather than at the site of the murder. There's also 2 more suspects, one of which was Marcus Harris and his accomplice, who was involved in the 1982 murder of another priest, Reverend Donald Hamilton, from Arizona. However, they were also cleared of any involvement in this particular murder. The killer of Father Patrick Ryan was investigated and cleared because he was in Tennessee at the time. Yet another suspect allegedly robbed a church and went so far as to threaten clergymen in Utah. However, he was also ruled out because he was discovered he was not in New Mexico at the time of the murder. The police had another suspect, and they have yet to rule him out though. The man was connected to the crime by an anonymous tip while serving time in a New York prison. He would later be questioned about Father Rivera's murder, and it would be found out that he was known to be in New Mexico around the time of the murder. It's notable that he flew into New Mexico from New York the day of the murder, particularly, and he was also involved in several burglaries and robberies while he was in Santa Fe. Interestingly enough, he had previously stolen a statue from Father Rivera's cathedral. When he was arrested, he had hoped that the Franciscans would ask for clemency for him. However, he was disappointed and potentially built up a grudge due to this, and he had stated, allegedly, that he would get even with said priests. It's also believed that his psychological profile was somewhat of a match for the killer, though there is no solid evidence linking him to the murder. In 2020, Brian D'Ambroso, author of Montana Murders, Notorious and Unsolved, revealed in a podcast that more than 35 years after the case, he had now gained access to notes of the lead detective in Kerrigan's case. D'Ambroso proposed the theory that based on the information he had access to, that it was likely that Kerrigan could have staged the crime scene and faked his own death, and perhaps this was with the assistance of the diocese, even though a conclusive link between Rivera and Kerrigan has not been established. The similarities seem too evident to ignore. Despite the years of investigation and postulation of multiple individuals close to the case, officials are no closer to solving the case. There has been a lot of discourse online about this case. However, as of now, there is no conclusion. If you remained with me until the end, I thank you, and I do hope you stay tuned and subscribe for more content.